Good evening and welcome. My name is Ginger Fay, and I'm the Global Director of Partnerships at Appleruth, which is a tutoring and education support company. We work with students who are at transition points in their lives, helping them achieve their goals. And we're here tonight with a wonderful friend and colleague, Dr. Andrea Brenner, to talk about one really important transition that happens not just for students, but for their parents as well. And that is that bridge from high school to college. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the changing role that parents have as their students transition to college. So this is a really exciting conversation, and I'm delighted to have you with us, Andrea, tonight.
Thank you.
I want to tell you a little bit about Appleruth before we get into the nitty-gritty of Andrea's conversation. A couple of bits of housekeeping. One is if you'd like to use closed captioning, live transcription has been enabled, so you can check that out on the bottom of your screen if that's something that would be helpful for you from an accessibility standpoint. We're delighted to make that available to you. Secondly, we are going to offer the recording of this conversation, and Andrea has been kind enough to share her slides with us tonight. So if you are doing the things we do as parents of adolescents, which is making dinner and dropping off and picking up and all kinds of other things. If you're in the midst of lots of things and not able to jot down notes, you'll be welcome to use the resources that Andrea is sharing with you at your leisure. And then I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Appleruth. We've been around for a little over 20 years, and we have really always been driven by a core belief that if you can change a student's self-belief, you can change that student's life. It really is about learning to believe in yourself and to recognize your own potential and possibility. And if you believe in yourself, then we can teach you anything. And we teach you a few different things. So we help students with academic tutoring. We work with students anywhere from sort of late elementary all the way through college. We love to do academic tutoring for students in college. Our tutors are, students of life forever, and they love it when they get a fun assignment like a Dead Sea Scrolls class or something like that they didn't think they'd get to revisit again. We also help students who are preparing for a high stakes college admissions entrance exam like the SAT or ACT. We help with the GRE if grad school is something that will be in your student's future. We also help with the entrance exams for selective high schools as well. And we also do executive function coaching. So that's helping students develop the organizational skills to be able to do their best work in life as well as in school. So we're just here to build better students and better learners for life. A couple of things we have coming up that I wanted to share with you. One, we're in the midst of a webinar series on mental health. It kicked off last night with a conversation about teens and tech. And then next week we'll do a teens and friends. And finally, at the end of August, one on teens and anxiety. Those will all be led by Dr. Jed Appleruth, who's the founder of our company. If you missed the first one, we can send you that recording too. But they're really great conversations, really helpful for those of us who are supporting our children in this time of transition. And it's a time of transition in many ways, right? As we return to whatever new normal, now normal is. We're also just getting started with a new writing workshop, which is appropriate for students anywhere from rising middle school students all the way through rising college freshmen like your kids. And so it's a really good practice for developing the analytical skills to organize your thoughts and present a persuasive piece of writing, which I believe Dr. Brenner has been the recipient of many, many essays over the years. And it's nice to have someone who's had a little bit of prep and training on that. So if any of those things would be of interest to you, I hope that you would invite us to continue this conversation. We're glad to be part of your students' journey and glad to be part of this adventure. And now I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm so grateful that Andrea is here. I am grateful for the work that she has done, and I'm grateful that she's going to share it with you tonight. I have found it incredibly valuable as someone who's worked in the college admissions and college counseling space for more than 25 years. I think, a lot of kids have worked with me because they thought getting into college was hard. I think staying in college and thriving in college is much harder than getting in. And that's what Andrea's work is all about. So Andrea is a really, I would say, an expert in the college transition process. And that has been really the focus of her work as an educator and an author. So she speaks frequently to high schools and parents and other educators about the challenges related to the transition to college. She is an expert because she spent 25 years as a college professor. She originated the first year experience program at American University in Washington, D.C., and she was the faculty director of the college's university college program as well. So she knows that of which she speaks, and she literally wrote the book on how to college. It's called How to College, and it's a fantastic resource. And her newest creation is a deck of cards called the Talking College Card Deck, which I really, really love and have used with my own family. And I find it to be incredibly valuable resource. And I'm thrilled that Andrea's here to share a few of the words of wisdom and suggestions that are in the magic of those cards. If that's something that you think would be helpful for your family, it's a great way to engage in some of the conversations that are hard to find ways to start, but incredibly important to have before your kids fly the coop. I believe Andrea is going to offer a special discount for viewers of this webinar. So if you stick around at the end, you'll be able to see that. In the meantime, I also want to invite you to put any questions that you have in the Q&A box. We're going to try and save a little bit of time at the end of the hour to answer any questions that you have. So as things come up, please feel free to pop those in the Q&A box, and we will cover as many topics as we can before we hit the end of the hour. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ginger. And I'm going to jump right in because it's already 8:07. So I have a lot to tell you. And I do want to remind you that you'll be receiving the recording. So don't feel you need to take notes. You will get the slides and the recording. So some of my work that I do, of course, Ginger mentioned, I think probably the important piece of my work is that I work backwards. Unlike other college transition educators who do sort of a chronological approach, which then there's nothing wrong with that. Makes sense, right? You start educating in middle school, then move to high school, and then move to college. Because I'm a college insider and spend so much time on college campuses, I actually work backwards. I take the information, the data about where students fail to thrive on college campuses, and I hope you're hearing me say fail to thrive, not fail. And then I kind of filter it back and I talk to families and specifically parents of high school juniors, seniors, and graduates about what they can do to make that transition easier based on where students in college are actually really failing to thrive and struggling. So I'm going to jump in by talking a little bit about perspective taking. And as Ginger mentioned, this is a transition for parents as well as for students, but it's a very different transition for both parties. And perspective taking is really important to prepare for that transition to college. So I'm going to give you an example. It's actually my favorite example. And my example is college move-in day. So that might be something that, if you're the parent of a junior or a rising senior, you haven't even thought about yet. But if you're the parent of a soon-to-be college student, that is right on the horizon. Here's what we hear a lot on college campuses: a new college parent talking about how this is the last day we can spend as a family of 5. We're going to take lots of pictures, take pictures before the room is set up, after the room is set up, with our student, with the college sign, with the mascot in the dining hall. And we're going to sort of pull together this last day because it's really the last day that we can spend as a complete family. On the flip side, the new college student is actually not saying it's the last day, but in fact, they're saying, well, this is actually the first day of my college life, and I want to explore, I want to meet new people. Neither perspective is wrong, but they do need to live hand in hand. And colleges have sort of stepped up and helped. Most colleges in the US now have sort of a goodbye to parent time. It might be a goodbye ice cream social at 4 o'clock. And that kind of is the nod to say, all right, parents, it's time for us to take your kids and you need to leave. But it's something that I encourage through my Talking College cards, through workshops I do, to kind of sit down and really have that conversation with your college-bound student. What is college move-in day going to look like? What time do we think we're heading out, etc. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about 6 major points. The first one is defining the differences between the role of a high school parent and the role of a college parent. And those are not always clear. There's no real handbook on that. The second is encouraging and normalizing mistakes and challenges. And mistakes and challenges are different. I'm going to talk about both of them. And then, of course, the important part of that is planning ahead with your high school student or your high school graduate about how those mistakes are going to be handled. So I hope you're hearing that. I'm not saying avoid mistakes completely. That is not realistic. First-year college students make a lot of mistakes. That's normative. But what's important is to have conversations about when mistakes happen, how are they going to be handled? Third, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about working early on some teachable and important college life skills. I've got lists of skills in my book. You can find a lot online, but it's really important to sit down with some of those lists, however you get them, and see, does my student know how to do some of these things that colleges are going to expect them to know? Fourth in my list is talking to parents about supporting your students as they explore campus resources and activities. I'll go more into that. And again, I hope you're hearing me say supporting your student as they explore. There's nothing wrong with the parent exploring, but really the goal of my conversation tonight is about how the student should be taking the lead here, and a parent should be in that supportive role. Number 5 of 6 is understanding and helping your student prepare for the differences between high school and college academics. I'm going to talk a little bit about academics tonight. And finally, I have an asterisk because I think it's the most important one, shifting language to the student as the problem-solving lead, discussing things like college scenarios, wellness, upcoming decisions, what would you do scenarios, and we'll dig into some of those. So let's move into the first one. Defining roles for the college. Very, very clear. The college tells parents and students, this is what the college is going to do. It's in our mission, and that's very easy to find online. And actually, most college missions sound remarkably similar. So that is a very, very well-explained role, the role of the college. The role of the college student is also well explained, sometimes even in the mission. There will be a student handbook. There's lots of information that comes before orientation about what we expect of our students behaviorally, academically, as leaders in the community, etc. But when it comes to college parents, not really well defined. And it's very challenging for some parents to know the difference between being a high school parent and being a college parent. So that's what I'm going to dig in and talk to you about tonight. So here is a list of just some of the ways that life differs from being a high school parent and being a college parent, right? So where a high school parent does a lot of organizing for their for their high school student, a college parent really needs to step back and moves from the organizational role to the supporting role. And again, that doesn't mean the student's doing it alone. It means the parent is encouraging the student to find the help they need on campus. High school parents, as parents, we are fixers. It's something that we have done for when our kids were babies. But of course, the college doesn't want you to fix your students' problems. So we're moving from fixers to encouragers. And I'll talk about the federal law called FERPA in the next slide, but it'll give you a little bit about what I mean by encouraging. High school parents often remove obstacles. I'm not a huge fan of the concept of the snowplow parent. The idea that helicoptering wasn't enough, and now we need to just scoop up that snow and move it out of the way so our child has no obstacles. Although I'm not a fan of that, I have seen a lot of high school parents who do remove obstacles just because their child is so overextended. But in college, it's really important for parents to step aside for their student to traverse those obstacles themselves. You may hear yourself, I certainly have heard myself, doing a little bit of that while you live under my roof, while your student is in high school and you're angry at them about something. But what happens when your child is no longer under their roof? What does that actually mean? And that's something that you're going to need to tease out in your own family. High school parents often provide daily reminders, right? Do you have the paper you need to turn in? Did you study for a chemistry test? Do you have your soccer jersey? And of course, not only should, as college parents, you not necessarily know all of those things that are coming up in your student's life in college, but you shouldn't be providing daily reminders. Those are things that the student, when they are on their way to college and in college, really should be doing on their own. And then finally, high school parents reiterate expectations again and again, right? I feel like I'm repeating myself. I feel like I'm a broken record. That's sort of the mantra of the high school parent. That needs to stop when we become college parents because the student needs to set their own expectations. So that'll just give you a little snippet of some differences between being a high school parent and being a college parent. I said I was going to mention FERPA. FERPA is a whole conversation. It could be a webinar unto itself. But if you're not familiar with the federal law that is called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, it's something you should probably educate yourselves about. And in a nutshell, unless your student signs a waiver, FERPA prohibits the college from sharing with you any of these bullets, right? So unlike in high school, you're no longer going to be able to see your student's grade portal. You're not going to receive report cards. You wouldn't even know if your student is failing a class, et cetera, et cetera. Those go directly from the college to the student unless there is a waiver that the family decides to sign. And I do not have an opinion about that. Every family is different. Every student is different. The only thing I would say about FERPA is that I do like to talk to parents about the fact that it's not just black and white. You don't have to say, you're on your own, kid. I am not going to have you sign the FERPA waiver. You better, let me know when tuition payments are due, or I'm going to oversee everything. I want you to sign the waiver so I can see every single part of your life. I think there is a gray area, and I really encourage families to kind of play with that gray area. So for example, you might start off by saying, first semester of college, I'm going to assume, like the college assumes, that you're going to be able to handle it. It's going to be my rules maybe for you to show me your grades. But unless I see a problem, I'm not going to have you sign the waiver. On the flip side, you might say, we're going to start off with the waiver. And if things go well in the fall semester, then maybe we'll lift it in the spring. So again, a conversation that needs to happen within a family. And as it says on the bottom, families should be prepared for these new realities and responsibilities. And it's something that you're going to want to talk about before your student leaves for college. As I mentioned, I'm not a fan of the term snowplow parenting or helicopter parenting. I'm not a fan of the term overparenting either. I don't believe in overparenting. I believe that we parent with great love, but sometimes that loving support becomes what I would kind of explain as detrimental enabling, meaning if I really can hold back, will my students succeed in this particular area on their own, even if it doesn't look as neat and tidy as if I did it for them or with them. So that's just something I'd like to talk about. And I want to talk about it as the example of the teacup that you see below. So why do I have a teacup here? Well, it's sort of an insider tip. College faculty members, professors, and staff members and administrators on college campuses often refer to first-year students who crack at the first disappointment as teacups. That's actually a term that is used on college campuses about those students who maybe are not college ready, or at least don't really have those resiliency skills built. So, I'm asked often, like, how do I not have a teacup? How does my kid not become a teacup? And there's so much that I'm going to talk about tonight that I can certainly help with that. But it is something that I want you to be aware. Is your student when they get their first lousy grade in college, what's their plan of action? And that's actually something I talk about in my Talking College cards, is not necessarily to avoid that bad grade. Of course, we'd love them to study and avoid that bad grade, but are they going to make that office hour appointment with a professor, or go to their graduate TA, or go to a peer who's doing well in a class, rather than text mom immediately and sort of have a breakdown? So something to think about is that concept of being a teacup or not being a teacup your freshman fall. The second on my list of 6 is encouraging and normalizing mistakes and challenges, and discuss how your child will handle them in college. So I gave you some tips or some little clues here with some pictures, but these are the most common first-year college mistakes that I saw 25 years on a college campus. First one is losing or breaking something important. That might be a student ID or a license. It might be a shattered laptop. And again, of course, we'd love to avoid these things, but they will happen. And the question is, talk in advance and really figure out how your student is going to handle something if they lose it or if it breaks. Next is a big student mistake is not using campus resources. When you've gone to a lot of these info sessions on college campuses, you've heard about all of the amazing campus resources, and colleges have so many campus resources of support for their students, but they're only useful if the student actually crosses the threshold and enters those spaces. So not using campus resources, or not even finding campus resources until maybe their sophomore spring is problematic, and sometimes really hurts a first-year student. The earlier they start with campus resources, the better. Another very common student mistake is making a poor financial decision, hopefully not a very large financial decision. It's usually something like under budgeting for something, or not budgeting at all, running out of meal swipes in the cafeteria because they didn't think of how many meals they had left on their card, things like that. But again, conversations that are wonderful to have in advance, really smart to have. And those are some of the prompts that I bring about in my cards. Not asking for academic help is another one. We have sort of shepherded our kindergarten through 12th graders with the idea that, you know, smart kids don't ask questions. And it's really the kids who are struggling who are asking for help. That really flips in college, because asking for help is cool again. And asking for academic help is really important, because the transition from high school to college in the academic world is actually pretty cumbersome for some kids. So the unsung heroes of the college campus are the office hours, both graduate TAs and professors, or even undergraduate TAs, asking for academic help, going to tutoring on the college campus, finding that math or that stats lab or the foreign language lab. They are all there. They know how to help students, especially first-year students. Getting over-involved or under-involved, those are two common mistakes, kind of both ends of the spectrum. Some students are so excited for the hundreds and hundreds of clubs and organizations that they join far too many. And others are focusing so much on their studies, or they're enjoying their free time without a parent telling them what to do, that they actually don't venture much outside of their residence hall, and they're not involved, and they actually sometimes struggle to make friends and peer connections. So it's really hard to find that sweet spot. My advice is always to find a club or organization that is something fun for you, the student, something that has to do with your career or your academics, so something for sort of forward facing. That might be, you know, a political science chat group, or a chemistry club, and then something that has to do with working for a community. So that might be a spiritual religious center, that might be volunteering in the local community, going out on a bus with other college students, and tutoring, whatever that might be involved in. That's usually a great place to start, with 3 different activities in your freshman fall, and then you can build if you feel like you can handle more, or you can shrink down if you feel that that's too much. And the last one is making a poor social decision, often involving drugs and alcohol. Orientations on college campus do a wonderful job talking about drugs and alcohol, but really it's important to have some of those conversations before the student leaves for college. And then those were mistakes. These are some challenges. Time management is a big one. Lots of students really struggle with time management. I'll talk about that in a future slide. Roommate disagreements. They're wonderful residence life administrators and student staff members who can help you, but that's something that a lot of students do struggle with. Getting homesick, and when parents hear that, they think, my kid went to summer camp, they're not going to get homesick. It's usually not homesick for mom or dad. It's often homesick for a younger sibling. A pet is a big one that we hear a lot, or just the way of life, right? The ease, the familiarity of your family home, of the food you're used to, of somebody having food for you on the dinner table rather than you having to go out and find it, etc. A lot of first-year college students struggle with their health. That could be physical health, unrelated to COVID even. First year freshmen residence halls are big petri dishes for the common cold. And so it's really important to tease out how your student will take care of themselves if they're sick, physically sick, but also under that health banner would be mental health. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Course selection is something that a lot of students find as a challenge. A lot of first-year students don't realize that they're not going to get into every single class they want as a first-year student. Usually the classes that fill up quickly are the ones that juniors and seniors can register for. Your student will eventually age up and have that opportunity as well. But their freshman fall, they probably will not have the greatest course selection, no matter where they go to school. And then, of course, not being accepted into a group of choice. That could be Greek life, fraternity, sorority. It could be a particular group of friends that they would like to join with, and that is just not a great connection. So that's a real common student challenge. So if you hear any or all of these, please know your student is one of many who's also struggling. Number 3 of 6, I can't stress enough how important it is to begin early to work on some of these teachable life skills that they're going to need for college and beyond. I go into a lot of these skills in my book. Again, you can find a lot of these online, but you can see this list here, everything from knowing how to do laundry, knowing how to sew a button on. And a lot of people are like, sew a button on? Why would they even have a shirt that has a button? Well, a lot of students have jobs where they actually need to wear a button-down shirt or a uniform. Some of them have internships, etc. Knowing how to read schedules, knowing how to book travel. Almost every single college in the US has a kitchen in a dorm, in their first year dorm. So, send some of those recipes from home. And if your child really doesn't know how to do simple meal prep, that's something that you can teach them before they leave. Caring for and cleaning their living spaces, right? Especially if your student's not been somebody who has cleaned their own room or their own home. What's the difference between a surface cleaner and a glass cleaner? How often should you take out the trash, vacuum, etc.? And then you continue on and on. There's lots and lots of these tips and tricks for college level skills. And a lot of them are actually conversations that really need to happen. So you see one there that says the basics of health insurance. What is a copay? How do you fill prescriptions? So if you don't know about these conversations, you can certainly find some of these prompts online. My card deck are those prompts. But another great resource is to ask older siblings or friends who have had kids go to college and really say to them, what are the conversations you had and what are the conversations, more importantly, you wish you had had? So I'm going to give you some myths of high school families. The first one is that college-ready kids must excel academically and socially, and that is absolutely a myth. It is the rare first-year student who excels both academically and socially. Usually a student excels in classes and struggles a little bit socially, or really struggles in classes and has no trouble making friends. So if your student is kind of what you would consider behind in one of those areas, not to worry, there is time and they will figure it out in their first semester. The idea I hear a lot from parents is no one will get my kid. Nobody knows my kid as well as I do. And of course that is true. You know your kid best. But what we know on college campuses that you don't know, and it's the advantage we have, is we've seen tens of thousands of your kid, not specifically your kid, but we have seen all of those mistakes and challenges. We know that developmental brain, that 18 to 21-year-old, and the mistakes that they make. So even though we don't know your child as well, we do have those trend studies and we know what to look for. Teens don't want to learn from their parents. That's another myth. I believe that teens just don't want to have to ask any questions at all. But once those conversations start with conversation prompts or dinner table conversations that you might choose to have, you'll realize that teens actually do want to learn. If you bring up things you're pretty sure they don't know, like the basics of health insurance. We're going to talk about it this Wednesday night dinner. We're going to start talking about health insurance because we want to make sure you know everything. They're actually, usually willing to learn. They just don't want to admit that they don't know. There's also a myth that the college process ends with acceptances. I think Ginger mentioned this earlier. The transition process actually begins after that deposit. And there is sort of this chasm in between that high schools don't necessarily teach students how to prep for college other than the academic content. And colleges expect students to come in knowing a whole lot of stuff. And so that chasm in between is sort of that summer after senior year. Many of you are in that right now. And this is the time, if you have not already done so, to start having these conversations about the transition. And other kids have it all together. Another myth, there wouldn't be so many people registered for webinars like this one if everybody had it all together. Number 4 of 6. Support your child as they learn about campus resources and activities. And those are two separate things, but they're on the same slide because they're both ways that we as parents can support our kids. So I'm sure you know about the wonderful campus resources that are at the campus where your student's going to be attending or at any college campus. The counseling center, the health center, career center, religious communities, clubs and organizations, academic help, disability and learning support. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they're only useful if the student actually knows about them. And don't wait till the student gets to college to figure these out. These are all online now. This is the joy that we have after COVID, is that college support offices really just, their online profiles are fabulous across the board. And so it's wonderful. Do you think you're going to need disability support? Let's sit down together and let's look at the website. What should we do in advance? Oh, you're going to need to have specific shots at the health center. Let's figure out what the health center hours are, where you're going to be living, and where that health center is. So whatever it is, whatever supports your student is going to need, the earlier the better. And along those same lines, here's a typical second week of college, sort of an engagement fair or a college activities fair. They have different names on different college campuses. They can be very, very overwhelming, especially for students with anxiety or students who are more introverted. So the best advice I can give when it comes to this is, of course, don't miss the fair, but be knowledgeable in advance. If you know you want to join an a cappella group, check out the a cappella groups online, reach out through Facebook Messenger to the junior or senior who's the lead of that group. I'm an incoming first year student. I'm really interested in learning about when your auditions are. And then they know you. And when you go up to the table of that a cappella group, you already have a connection. It's something you're looking for, rather than just walking around sort of dumbfounded. Some colleges have up to 900 clubs and organizations, and it can be really, really overwhelming. So the earlier the better, checking out all of those clubs and organizations online. I also feel strongly that it's important to define what adulting means. If you ask a high school or a college-bound student, like, what does it mean to be an adult? A lot of them say it means, going it alone, not relying on others. Some of them say, I have no idea what it means. It's a total mystery to me. But to adults, we know that being an adult means using our resources, asking experts, asking family to help us if we're in a crisis, owning our mistakes. And what I love to do when I work with high school parents is to kind of think about redefining that word adulting, and to teach our high school students that it actually doesn't mean doing it alone, but it means finding the resources you need to ask for help. Number five, understand and help your student prepare for the differences between high school and college academics. And I know Apple Ruth does an absolutely wonderful job with this. This is a page from my book, How to College. I'm not going to go into great details, but in terms of time management, just a couple of things to think about. High school is about 35 hours of class per week, and college is only between 12 and 15 hours of class a week. That leaves a lot of free time for students. Of course, there's a lot more studying they need to do on their own, but students are often overwhelmed with the under-programmed life they have once they get to college. And the more organized they are, the better they can fill that time usefully. Parents in high school might contact teachers, and it's completely okay. And that doesn't happen in college. There's no such thing as a parent reaching out to a professor. Many assignments, you may have heard your students say, it's okay, I did lousy on that test. I've got 7 more tests in this marking period. That's very different in college. A college class may have only 1 or 2 grades for a whole semester. So the grades are weighted more heavily. And in order to really sort of assess their academic progress, they might need to go to office hours. And then finally, preparation for class. Teachers will often explain readings and relevant concepts in class in high school. So your high schooler may have said to you, I did the reading tonight, don't really get it, but it's okay, it'll be explained in class tomorrow. And they're right, that happens in high school. In college, it's quite different. If the student doesn't understand something, they are absolutely required to figure out what they don't understand before the next class. That might mean office hours, that might mean talking to a friend or going to a tutoring center. So these are just some tips that you can give your students. The biggest differences between academics in high school and college are actually not the academic content. They're the time management, the professionalism, and the preparation for class. Finally, 6 of the 6 on my list, and I said this is the most important, and I believe wholeheartedly that we should be shifting language to the student as the problem-solving lead, not us as the fixer, as the parents, and sort of discuss some of those college scenarios, some wellness things, some upcoming decisions that they're going to have to make. This is the college wellness wheel. You may have seen this in high school, but your students will absolutely see this during orientation in college. It's pretty much across the board. And the idea here is that college requires students to manage internal and external experiences on a daily basis. And think about when your student leaves their residence hall in the morning and they go out into the world, how many of these things they're going to have to deal with. If you start with the orange physical pie piece on the right, upper right, they're going to walk out of their dorm and they have, either had a good night of sleep or didn't have a good night of sleep. They've either left time for breakfast and ate something healthy or not, right? They also have sort of that mental and emotional piece. A lot of them might have, anxiety. They might have roommate issues. They might be sad about something or anxious about something. Lots of students also have financial issues that are weighing on them. And, did I run out of meal swipes? Am I worried about how my tuition is going to be paid? Social is another one that could be, and I can say this as having been a college professor for 20 years, when students came into my class and they just looked distraught, it usually wasn't my sociology class. It was usually that they had a fight with their roommate, or they had an issue with a boyfriend, or something that was social related. But of course, it's not just their brain that the professor gets in the classroom. And so that social piece walks with their student out of their dorm and is a big part of some of that anxiety that they might have their first semester. Environmental, is their room a good place to be? Are their professors welcoming? Do they have an identity that they feel is welcomed on their college campus? Intellectually, are they learning? Do they feel that this class is dumb? Or are they actually, bending their brain a little and learning some new things? Career, that's something we don't think about, but you're hearing constantly about students who have internships, or you are hearing announcements or seeing announcements or getting emails about job fairs and career fairs. So even if that first semester freshman isn't necessarily worried about that career path right now, they're constantly getting messaging that they're going to have to know about that soon. And then finally, the existential nature. Why am I here? What is college all about? So that's a lot to be on a college student just from walking out of their residence hall in the morning. And that's something that I really want parents to know. There's another important piece that I don't think is talked about quite enough, and that is what I call the stress-distress continuum. You may have seen this either in the mental health field or in the actual pain management field. You break your arm and you go to a hospital and you might be asked by a medical provider, can you tell me where your pain is from 0 to 10? And the mental health world, counselors are starting to use this also. Where is your anxiety today? Where is your depression today? I think what's really important about it is that everybody's button, which turns from stress, which is normative for a college student, to distress, which can be dangerous and require outside help for a college student. Everybody's button is different. For some students, it's maybe between 3 and 4. For some students, it's between 8 and 9. And nobody can sort of tell your student where their button is when stress is going to move to distress. That's something I encourage families to talk about in my cards and in my book. And I would encourage you to do this tonight is, your student best, as we already talked about, figure out kind of where they are. What are those warning signs when stress to them turns into distress? One more thing I would say is there's no such thing as the 0 to 1 for a college student. Mild is sort of the go-to normative level of a brand new college student. Mild stress, that's normative, that's where most are. So it's actually not a 0 to 10 scale. It's usually kind of like a maybe 1.5 or 2 to 10 scale. And so that's something for parents to keep in mind as well. These are just a couple of examples from my cards. Regardless, if you pick up my cards, these are conversations that you can come up with on your own. So some of these give you ideas, beginning to discuss what would you do scenarios and upcoming decisions that your student is going to be making. So if you take a look at personal choices, that pink one on the left, that actually comes from a section on drugs and alcohol, asking your student, how would you care for a friend who is very drunk or has passed out? And what would you do if you see a student you don't know on college campus who is very drunk or passed out? So again, what would you do scenarios? There's not necessarily one right or wrong answer, but let's let your student tease it out, and maybe you can help them as they come to some of these the what would you do scenario ideas. Clubs and organizations in purple on the top, I asked students, when you picture joining clubs in college, what would you like to do? Do you want to hone those skills and passions? Are you going to just continue with trombone because you are an excellent trombone player and you love it? Or do you want to try something completely new? Or maybe you want to revisit an activity that you enjoyed as a child, like soccer, but you didn't really have time for it, or you didn't have that skill level to perform it at the level you needed to be on a team in high school, or any combination of those. And let your student kind of tease out. Many of them haven't thought about these things, but they're great questions to ask. On the bottom, roommates and friendships. Majority of colleges are much more economically diverse than most high schools. Most high schools are pretty homogeneous. So here's a great what would you do scenario. Ask your student, how might you approach a situation where a new college friend cannot afford things that you can afford, or where you cannot afford things that others can, such as a restaurant meal or a concert ticket. So if your student is somebody who has some extra spending money and they can go out for pizza or they can go out for sushi, but they have a roommate who can only eat on the meal plan because that is their budgeted money for their food. That's something that really can be teased out. How will your student handle that? And then finally, when it comes to health, this is incredibly important, teasing out your personal narrative, your personal health history. So if the student, let's say, sprains an ankle and ends up in the emergency room and they're asked for these things, are they able to narrate their past surgeries, allergies, illnesses, injuries, chronic conditions, etc.? So those are, again, familial conversations, but they're really important to have before that student has an accident or is sick in college. And then as I draw to a conclusion here, practice reflective listening. If you've taken an adolescent psych course, this is something you've probably learned about. If your student comes into the room angry or stressed or sad or crying or upset, any kind of heightened emotion, instead of going into fixer mode, a great tip is to stop your student and say, I hear you, I see you. Do you want to just vent, or do you actually want me to help you problem solve? And I think you might be surprised how a lot of times they say, I just want to vent, or I just want you to listen. I don't want you to help me figure it out. And then the other thing I would suggest is try using I rather than you messages. You may have heard this before. A lot of middle school folks talk about this, and certainly in high school, it's wonderful. So instead of saying, you promised to text me when you got to so-and-so's house, turn the exact same language into an I message. I get nervous when you promise to text me and you don't. The you message often ends with a defensive adolescent, and the I message often ends with an apology. So these are just different ways to approach reflexive listening, and I really love these two approaches with teens. Another way that you can approach reflective listening is to help reframe language used by young adults. So if your student comes to you, your child comes to you and says, I have this problem, what should I do? And again, I've already talked about not going into fixer mode. I love to train the high school students I work with to say, I have a problem, I've thought it out, here's my plan, what do you think? And their plan might not be terrific. We might actually have to edit their plan as adults, but it gets them into that problem-solving mode, because when they have a problem getting into a class and they go to their academic advisor and they say, what should I do? The academic advisor is not going to tell them what to do. They're going to say, well, what do you think you should do? So the earlier, the better with some of that language. And so finally, what about now? What can you do now as a high school parent? So I would say, number one, tease out your teen's specific needs for growth, right? Maybe it's emotional, maybe it's social, and start talking and working on those things. Not everything needs to be worked on. Think about ways teens can step up and parents can step out in your particular family. If your kid's getting up for a summer job and you're waking them up rather than getting up with their alarm, that's going to be detrimental in college. So think about ways that you can sort of train them for all the things that they're going to be doing on their own. Number three, remember that roles for college parents are not well defined. I opened with that. And you will make mistakes in the process. There's no one right way to be a college parent, just like there's no one right way to be a high school parent. And then number four, understand that growing up is not the same as being a grown-up. and really start to discuss some of those growing up scenarios. Finally, my last slide, the goal here is to help your teens help themselves. That is truly the goal of the transition to college, and let them take the central role as they prepare for that transition. So I'm going to end there. I do want to, this is a QR code. If you take a photo of that, you go to my website, and I would encourage you to follow me on social media. If you liked what I had to say, I do lots of free giveaways. There's wonderful free webinars. I share lots of colleagues' webinars. And so there's always free materials and free gifts. Also, if you're interested in buying a deck of the Talking College cards, you can use the promo code SAVE2 on my website, and you can purchase them through there. And that is it. I'm going to take a drink here. Thank you so
Andrea,
much.
Let me give you a chance to catch your breath and take a sip. That was a ton of information in a short period of time, and I'm really grateful for all of it. As you know, I am getting ready to enter this transition process as a parent of a rising high school senior. And I am a big fan of the Talking College card deck because I think it engages us in conversations that we might not have thought to have. And I find it incredibly helpful and valuable. So thank you for sharing so much of your hard-fought wisdom with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, and I want to reiterate that we'd be glad to take, we've got a few minutes left, probably about 15 minutes left, that we can take any questions that you all might have about things you are worried about for your own kids as they make the transition, things that you might wonder about about life on the other side. Andrea has seen and done it all. And so this is a great chance for us to take advantage of her knowledge and experience. So I invite your questions. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and we will, as I say, share the recording and these slides with you as well. So I would like to ask a question to start, if you don't mind, which is, of the cards in the card deck, do you have a favorite? Do you have one that you feel like is just a really, really great place to start any conversation for any family?
That's a great question. I'm thinking about the feedback I've heard from parents. I would say there's one, so the card deck is divided into themes, and the first theme are called the big questions. And to me, that's and it's chronologically the first themes I encourage families to talk about. And again, regardless if you buy the deck or you come up with these questions on your own, these are the big questions. What does college cost? Why am I going to college? What are my biggest fears? What parent are your biggest fears for your child? What's the difference in learning in high school and college? So sort of the big existential questions. The one that I hear again and again from parents is, I never thought to talk to my kid about how much college costs. So regardless of, who's paying, how it's being paid, what the financial aid package looks like, or if there is not a financial aid package, it's really important to understand, for the student to understand this enormous chunk of money that is going towards their education.
Thank you. I think that's such a great, suggestion. And it reminds me actually of the first thing I think families should talk about when they start the college search, which is the budget for college and how much they can support their children. They might want to support them emotionally fully, but they may not be in a position to have saved as much as college, particularly private colleges, cost these days. And that's not a sign of bad parenting or bad savings or anything else. It's a sign that, college has become exorbitantly expensive, right? Literally 1 year at the college I graduated from cost the same thing as the 4 years I spent there did. And how anybody could have anticipated that change. Well, if you could, I guess you probably saved enough because you knew
exactly
how to do
well,
that.
And Ginger, I'm amazed at how I hear from parents again and again, about the money piece for sure. But, even just that simple question of why are you going to college? And, sometimes there's a pause before the student says, I guess it was just sort of expected. It was the thing you do after high school. What do you hope to get out of it? And really just maybe that's over a dinner table conversation, or maybe that's a walk or a car ride. I love having private conversations with my kid when they're stuck in the car with me, because they can't get out. And that really is sometimes a great conversation starter. Why are you going to college?
It's my favorite. I actually, when I was a college counselor, the first question I asked a student, so I said families should always have the conversation about cost, but the first question I asked the student is, do you want to go to college?
Mm.
And that, even sort of before the why question, was often a kind of was sort of a moment of like, where they would ask themselves, do I?
Yeah.
Like, or am I just doing what's expected of me? And most students did come to decide that they wanted to, and they could articulate why they wanted to. And that was a really helpful way to start the whole process, because they had intention and purpose and motivation for what this gauntlet we were going to run through together.
Right.
And that was a really great way to start. And I agree with you. There's the power of the car. Those conversations are really, really valuable. I think that's part of the reason why I think it's important for families to visit colleges if they can, even if they visit schools local to them that are not really on the college list, but just to get that magical moment of time and reflection. And eventually you can only stare at your phone or out the window for so long before you
I agree.
have a real conversation. Okay, I have to laugh because someone asked if we had any idea what year FERPA was enacted. And I'm embarrassed to say, I actually know.
Go for it.
It was 1974. I don't know why, but I do know that it was a fun fact that I had to memorize as a Green Dean when I was a brand new admissions officer at Duke. And so I do know. I don't know why someone needs to know that besides me, but
it's been around for a while.
It's been around for a while. This is
yeah.
not a new concept. I think that is important to know, right? This isn't a new idea. And along the lines about FERPA, someone was asking, it sounds like that form could be signed at any point or nullified at any point. So can you clarify if that is really the case? And then we're going to talk about a secondary question related to that afterwards, but let's
Sure.
get clarification.
So colleges all do it differently. But usually it's part of the early package. So you'll hear about FERPA. Usually, if you haven't already heard about it, you'll hear about it with a list of, your all the things you have to still do before your child actually leaves for campus. But yes, you are correct. Most colleges will allow you to nullify it if you decide to go with my gray area and change your plan. That is up to you. And I think more important than anything, there is no right way to do it. Every family is different. Your kid. Of those 5 on the list, the last one I actually had an asterisk on because FERPA actually is supposed to keep your students' financial information private. But colleges got smart and they realized that if they sent the tuition bill to the student, they were not getting their money. And so most colleges now have a sort of a shared user account where you have access. So even if you don't sign the waiver, you will still, you will not have access to your students' grades or if they're on academic or behavioral probation, but you will still be able to see and usually get an email from the school when tuition is due. So if you are kind of holding off or thinking, I'm going to have my students sign the waiver because I don't want to miss that, that financial piece because my kid doesn't answer emails or won't send that to me, the college has found a way to kind of bend that anyway, and you will absolutely learn about those.
I think that's an excellent point and a great acknowledgement, I think, from the inside of the schools, sort of what they figured out with it. And some families may already be familiar with FERPA because it is actually on the application as well. So when students are applying to college, they make a decision about FERPA again, and that decision has to do with whether or not the contents of the application will remain an accessible part of the student's academic record when they enroll. So there are some colleges where your application does kind of stay with you, and they'll send it, that just becomes sort of your record at the registrar's office and moves on. Other schools, it goes into deep cold storage, never to be seen again. And then at some schools, there is this sort of excision of the letters of recommendation and things like that might have been part of the application, but things like your transcript basically stick around. So a lot of high school students think, oh, I'm not signing away this waiver because I'm going to want to see those letters of recommendation. I have to remind them that the only place that they could see them is the college they enroll in, which is to say a school that admitted them and a school they chose to go to, which is to say their recommendations were probably pretty terrific.
Yep.
And the only reason you'd want to go see them is because you were having a hard day and you wanted to be reminded that your high school teachers thought you were awesome and had a lot of potential. But they would also still need to be in your record at the registrar's office. It's a lot of ifs between then and there. So I do typically encourage students to waive their FERPA rights to their application for that reason, but this is an additional time to make that choice. And often there may be, as you point out, Andrea, I think wisely, there may be reasons to have a different choice and also at different times. The follow-up question was, does FERPA have, does that cover medical issues as well, or is that a separate thing?
That is a separate thing.
That is a very separate thing. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there are, and you know, the one resource, and I have no financial connections to this, but there is a phenomenal resource called Mama Bear Forms, MAMA Bear as in grizzly bear, BEAR Forms. Mama Bear Forms is one of the best resources out there. Tons of free information and also very inexpensive forms. They will talk you through, so I don't have to waste our time here. They will talk you through every type of different like medical health proxy, what everything means, what it means from state to state. Sometimes it's a little confusing if your student goes to school in a different state. Everything is available on that resource, and I suggest that resource to everyone. But it's really important to understand, if your child is hurt in school and they're far away from home, will you have access to their medical records? And that's definitely something that another conversation in addition to FERPA that you should be having as a family.
Excellent. I also recommend Mama Bear Legal quite a bit myself, and I'm not just I'm not just the president, I'm also a client. I remember those old commercials. I have both enjoyed reading Andrea's book and in using her cards with our family. I've also have Mama Bear Legal all set and ready to go when our child turns 18, because we want to be sure that we can be partners. And we've talked about that as a family, right? That we want to be partners as CJ, who's our oldest, takes responsibility for their own healthcare and those responsibilities. This is the time where we're both holding the baton, right? I'm passing the baton off. It's a dangerous moment in the Olympics, right? When the baton gets passed, that's when you could drop it and people get disqualified. So we're being really thoughtful and intentional about making that pass. Here's a great question. How do you start having a conversation with your kid that is super maybe awkward or uncomfortable for you? A conversation maybe about sex and birth control. Maybe your kids are going to start asking you questions about your own history and background, and you're not sure how much you want to share. Maybe that's there's a feeling about what kind of judgment and how to sort of have a conversation about keeping them safe, but also having a conversation about the values that you have as a family and those kinds of things. So how do you?
Great. That's a terrific question. And I would kind of approach it two different ways. First, I wouldn't jump into that before you've had some of the earlier conversations, right? Because you want to get into the habit of having conversations. I work with some families that have, they're in the crunch now for their kid leaving for orientation fairly soon or in a month. And so they say, we do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we do 45 minutes in the evening, and we dig into your cards. And again, if you don't want to use the cards, you can have your own conversations. And then so after you've gotten some sort of comfort level with adult conversations, you can move into them. Part of that adult conversation piece is, and I actually have a little bit of a letter, I have a letter to the student in the card deck that in so many words says, you cannot grunt answers here. You really need to engage, because these conversations are for college students. They're not for high school students. They are adult conversations, and we expect you to engage in as an adult. So once that is established, I think it's easier to get into some of the tougher conversations. And I would say that anything that is uncomfortable, drugs and alcohol, issues of consent, and all of that's in the cards. These are conversations that you can, are going to be a part of orientation on every college campus. A lot of students already have to do sort of an online alcohol and drug education before they actually get to campus. They might have to do some knowledge about consent or consent and rape, whatever those buzzwords are on that campus or in that state. Education often starts before they head to campus. So those are wonderful ways to start. I was reading the campus website, and I know that you're going to be doing a whole alcohol and drug unit, or a unit on sex and consent. We really haven't talked about this yet. So let's start having some of these college conversations, because these things are about to come up a month from now. And again, these are conversations that you can sort of ease into, but I would never start jumping in with the tough stuff. In terms of sharing your own, your own medical or your own sexual health history, that is not something I would ever weigh in on. That's completely up to you, and the way you have a relationship with your student or your child. But I do know from a lot of my work over the years with college families or high school families about to be college families, that students really begin to open up when their parent opens up. So within the realms of whatever you're comfortable with, knowing that you can give them a little bit more than you gave them in high school, know that it actually might open up the door. They may share some things with you that they haven't yet shared.
Thank you, Andrea. That's lovely. I'm reminded of how smart my parents got while I was at college. It was kind of amazing. I didn't think they knew anything before I left for school. And then when I came back and I was actually doing a good job listening to them, it was kind of remarkable, everything they knew. It is a wonderful moment of transition in relationships. We've reached the end of the hour. I've got a last question for you,
Sure.
if you don't mind. And I think this is an excellent one. So drop-off day is a pretty difficult, kind of sticky day. It's a big moment. I remember my dad wrote me a card, like on his business card, like basically like, good luck. I felt abandoned, right? At this college I felt so lucky to go to. All of a sudden I was like, why are you leaving me here? So it's a difficult day. There's a lot of emotion and expectations in there. So do you have any tips for parents who are getting ready to have this, empty out the car, load it up, matching bedspreads moment with their kids? Any tips for parents on how to be respectful for their students and celebrate that day, that looking forward moment for them?
Yes, absolutely. And I have a card on that, right? So number one, have a conversation in advance. Let's tease out this day, what time we're going to arrive. And of course, you're going to be assigned a time that you're allowed to arrive, usually on a college campus, sometimes based on the alphabet or where they live. You're going to look at the schedule that the campus shows, because sometimes there will be a natural breaking point. All families leave at 3 o'clock or whatever it might be, or families from out of state leave at certain time. And actually talk about that schedule, plan it out. Then I would really encourage your student to reach out to their roommate or roommates if they're in a suite or apartment situation, because there's nothing harder than being the only student when everyone else has a parent and your parents have left. So, find out, call up or email or text or whatever you might do with your new roommate, even if you don't know them well. I'm talking to my family about what time they're leaving. What time do you think your family is going to be heading out? Maybe there's a lunch together, or maybe there's not, but the idea is to tease it out well in advance. The other thing I'd say, and this, I know we're out of time, is let it be a bedspread moment. Let those earlier heavy, I love you, I'm proud of you, the big talks happen before the college campus. That can happen at the hotel or at home the night before. That can be the tear fest if that's something that your family does. But I really believe that the college drop-off should be about the move-in process, and then all that other stuff can already have happened, or they can wait for their first phone call. You're muted, Ginger.
Thank you so much for that, and for all that you've shared with us over the last hour. I hope that everyone has a chance to celebrate and enjoy this moment. It's a really exciting moment of transition, but it is a time of change, and there are things to mourn. There are things that will be different, and things we have to let go of and savor, but say goodbye to, and other new adventures that are coming and hopefully will be exciting ones. So we wish all the best to our families that are watching tonight, getting ready for this transition. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you for your engagement. And thank you so much, Andrea. Have a great night,
Pleasure.
everybody.
Thanks for having me. Good night, everyone.